Okay, sorry it's been a while. Gonna try and get everything up to speed of what I've gotten done. At least it's been probably 2.5 weeks since I've done any updates or videos. So there's a lot to go over. Probably have to break it up into a few. I've been super busy with not only this, but also work related stuff. So I haven't really been putting as much time into this as I had planned originally, but still getting a lot of stuff done. So anyway, we're gonna talk about, I guess, what I did to finish the paint, which is obviously done. Then I'll talk about my engine, which is hiding up in the front there, and just some other things that I've run into along the way. So enjoy the video. Right, so first thing I want to discuss is the paint job, which I think turned out really nicely. I was a little bit skeptical of how it was going to look in the long run, but I think it's looking pretty sweet. My sister, who I begged to do an interview with me, but she's since left the country, she did most of the masking job, and she did a fantastic job. Masking was really hard to do. It took a lot of patience. We used a special tape. It's called Tessa tape. It's made in the UK, so it's hard to get, and it's honestly not. It basically allows you to put curved lines on, mask off curved lines. It's honestly not the best at doing that. It peeled up, and we struggled with having the edge of the tape peel up and then blowing paint underneath that. So we tried other just masking tape that we cut thin and tried to lay down. That didn't work very well. And then athletic tape actually worked pretty well. It's much cheaper. And then also the last one that we used finally was electrical tape. The problem with the electrical tape is I didn't want to leave it on too long, because if you did, it would almost start to bind with the paint. And when you went to peel it off, it would peel paint off. So not an ideal solution. But towards the end there, we got really good at just throwing electrical tape down, masking around it, and then painting it really quickly and getting the electrical tape off within, an hour of putting it on, maybe 2 hours of putting it on. So that was our final solution there. There are a few spots on this that, again, I'm not super excited about. I had to respray so many times. The silver is impossible to work with if you make a mistake. Basically, there's nothing you can do. If you screw up the silver, if you put a run on it or whatever, the only option is to respray it. And it's not even like you can just mask off a square and respray it, because you'll leave a noticeable square mark. If you screw up, you just have to mask off that whole section and respray the whole thing. So there were a lot of times when that happened, and honestly, there may be 1 or 2 more tiny spots I could do that on here, but it's at this point it's diminishing returns. So I think it looks plenty good for this type of build that we're doing here. The color scheme that we've got is, this is a polar gray, Nevada silver, and then federal gray. And my fuselage was actually, it's a totally different gray. It's a cardinal gray. It's the one that Kitfox just provides as one of their powder coat options. And it actually color matches pretty well. It's not the same, but because of the way that the silver kind of plays tricks on your eyes, you can't even tell that it's not one of the same colors. So really happy with how the colors turned out. I had to wait, 3 weeks almost to get this paint because of the winter storm in Texas that shut down all shipping, but totally worth the wait. And I'm glad that it's finally done, because paint was really wearing me down. A few gotchas on the paint. You can see this edge here. This is where it was sprayed, and this is where we actually dabbed it on with a little makeup dabber that my sister found at the store. We had goofed up this line with the masking tape, so I thought I could come back with a makeup dabber and clean it up. And it actually looks really good as long as you don't look at it in the glare. You can see where the makeup dabber went over the edge there. So I wouldn't, again, the best way to repaint is just respray. I've tried polishing this. I've tried brushing it in. I've tried sanding it. I've tried all sorts of things to make that go away. There's really no way of making any texture go away that I know of. I've tried a lot of different techniques without just completely remasking it and respraying it. But for me, to remask and respray this would be, two days of work to do the whole wing. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it really is a lot of work to mask this stuff off. It takes a lot of patience. You have to put paper down and all that jazz. So it's just, I wish I could do all this stuff right the first time, but I have to learn the right way before I can figure that out. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of resources for that. So figuring it out as I go. This one's pretty hard to see, but you can kind of see, this was this was the Tessa tape that we used. This is with some of the stuff that it leaves behind. If it's not laying perfectly flat and tight, then it leaves these little sort of fingerlings that come in on the edge. They're definitely not bad. Honestly, they add a little bit of texture to the lines so that they look a little softer. And you can actually see that in some of these other corners. It becomes problematic on the, let's see, inside curve. So these bends that go inward versus outward, these are the ones that are problems, problem curves. But definitely a lot more work than I would have ever imagined. Okay, so the moral of the story with the paint is just patience. You got to redo things sometimes if it doesn't work out perfectly the first time. You got to remask and redo it, and it's just taking your time to either get it just bang on right the first time, or if you don't get it exactly perfect the first time, then you're going to have to go through and just do all these little touch-up moves down the road, which actually are pretty time-consuming and take a lot of patience. So I'm really, really glad to be done with the paint. There are wingtips, cowlings, tail access covers, boot cowl, and maybe something else that needs to be painted. I'm not painting anymore. All the fiberglass and aluminum stuff, flaperons. Fiberglass and aluminum stuff I'm going to put in the back of a trailer, take it down to an auto shop, and have them put some urethane coats on for me, just to get a close enough color match to everything else. So at this point in time, I don't want to set up the paint booth again and deal with the urethane paints because they're really sketchy. They're actually not great for your respiratory system. And there are some polyfiber has like a Mark IV or Mark II paint that'll work, but it's like a 4-part paint that's really hard to paint. And these auto shops have been painting for decades, so they're actually really, really good at painting. And I figured just let the professionals do it. I don't know how much that's going to cost me, but we'll figure that out when we get there. I don't want to paint anymore. I feel like I've finished that chapter of my life, and we'll just let the rest of the stuff get done by professionals. All right, a few more things here with the covering. This basically piece of aluminum, it's a reinforcement plate that you put in when you're covering. I had to cut it back, which was actually really hard because it's hard to get in there. I actually just drilled a bunch of holes with a drill and then filed it out. But you can't get back to that nut on the back side of this attachment point without opening that up. I guess I could have staged it back a little further, but I don't know. I just didn't really think about it when I was covering. So I had to fix the problem down the road. I did this on both sides, but it's definitely something to think about when, I wish I'd thought about this when I was covering because I would have avoided that in the future. Same thing is true with these guys. Actually, it's not as bad as this side. This one here, when I put my jury strut tabs on, this one was just barely poking out underneath the fiberglass leading edge, Laker leading edge. So if I had done this properly, this little tab should have been pointing down a little bit. So I would have, doing this right, I would have biased this tab almost a little further forward on both sides just to make it easier to access after covering. I definitely can get a bolt through there, as you can see, but pretty tight. And this little masking tape trick is something I've been using to preserve the paint. You can see it here. When I was putting this jury strut attachment, I put masking tape down to protect the paint. Now, I guess this whole thing wouldn't have been a problem if I had put this in not the correct location, but the recommended location, which I believe is over here. If you have a access port or inspection ring here, then you can reach your hand in and get back to the other side to work on this strut attach point. So, you live and you learn. That I'm okay with it being there because I can access this now. I definitely dropped one of these nuts all the way back to the bottom and then had to use a magnet tray to get it to come all the way back. So it's not a big deal, but something that would have been nice to avoid from the start. All right, so cat's out of the bag. I put a 912 IS engine on this plane, and I'm going to take a few minutes here to talk about why I chose this option and what the other options are and why I didn't choose those options. So here we go. First things first, there are a few things I wanted to eliminate from basically the equation early on. There's so many engines options out there, and there's a few things that I did pretty early on that eliminated most of the options and got me down to a few to pick from. So first things first, I did not want carburetors. Carburetors are a lot of work. They're finicky, they have to be balanced, and it's just, in my opinion, it's an inferior way of delivering fuel to an engine. If you don't believe me, then ask why no automaker basically sells a stock car with carburetors anymore. Maybe motorcycles do, I don't know. They're on a 4-stroke engine, carburetors just don't make a lot of sense anymore because the computers have gotten so good and so reliable that, you know, it's not even really much of a thought. So that already eliminated a lot of the Rotax series and some of the other popular engine choices. So let's see, what else did I consider here? I have a list. So reliability was a big one for me. I wanted a motor that I could rely on that wasn't going to crap out on me when I'm in the middle of nowhere. Some of the options that are really popular and attractive didn't really make sense to me because they weren't as reliable. What are some of those options? Well, you can take Steve Henry's plane or Project Kitfox plane. They have the Yamaha Apex engine. Now, Project Kitfox is probably going to be a lot more reliable than Steve Henry's because he's just taking a stock Apex, and those are actually probably pretty reliable engines off the bat, but it's still not proven like some of the Rotax series engines. So sure, it might be reliable, but there's a risk involved in the uncertainty of the fact that the engine may not perform when you need it to. So I just wiped the long list of automotive rebuild engines and sort of big bore kits that they put on small Rotax engines. All those engines where you basically are taking something untested or pushing the limits of an already existing engine, those just, I swiped off the list because the reliability is too much of an important factor for me. And so I just didn't even want to go down that road. So let's see, weight. So weight was another big consideration. There are the traditional Continental and Lycoming options. They make some experimental versions that are pretty lightweight and very high power, like 180 horsepower or maybe even 200 horsepower. But the downside of those engines is they're very, very heavy. So maybe you do get 180 horsepower out of these things, but they weigh like 250 pounds or something ridiculous like that. So that cuts down your maximum gross weight, your overall performance. Your fuel burn is significantly higher. And just anytime you have a big, heavy, honking dinosaur engine up there, it's just an inferior option, I think, in my opinion, because with aircraft, the lighter the better. So that eliminates all your Lycomings and Continental sort of traditional Lycosaurus options. I'll talk about efficiency. So efficiency was an important thing to me. If you look at like some of those Lycoming engines and even the 915 IS, they burn a lot more fuel than this option. This one only burns, like say 3.5 gallons an hour, which is amazing that you're only burning 3.5 gallons an hour. I'm not like an avgas weenie. I'm not trying to pinch pennies on fuel, but it does cut down on your functional range if you are burning a lot more fuel. So I take that with my current truck that I have, which is a replacement for my previously burned truck, which was a diesel. I have to go to the gas station now twice as much with this car. And sure, it's got a lot more horsepower, it's much bigger, and in general, it's a much more fun car to drive, but that does come at a penalty at the pump. It's not a matter of paying for the gas, that's not fun, but the real thing is that, you know, I have to stop more often to get gas, and that in itself is a time and sort of enjoyment penalty. So let's see, what do we got last points here? I guess I already talked about carbs and how they're just not an option. Upgradability was something I thought about early on, and I was originally going to go with the 912, I guess it's ULS, which is the 100 horse carbureted version, because you can very easily upgrade those to fuel injected turbocharged versions with big jugs. I mean, so you could put big bores on them, fuel injection kits. So you could upgrade the 85 horse Rotax and the 100 horse carbureted Rotax. You can upgrade those to do all sorts of cool stuff. The drawback to that is the same reliability question, which is, do I really want to be screwing around with a perfectly good engine that's, you know, carrying myself or maybe some other precious cargo with me in the plane? So I was very, very strongly considering a big bore kit on a 912 UL because it's just so cheap and you know, you can do a lot of things with them, but I ruled that off the list. That's one of the big drawbacks to the 912 IS is you can't do anything to it. As far as I know, there might be some tune or something that you can do to them, but you buy it, it's 100 horse, and that's all you get. So there's nothing down the line that you can do to soup it up, but again, I'm okay with that. So my two main options, I ruled out the 914 UL because carburetors. I just didn't want to deal with that. So I was basically stuck with the two main ultra reliable, super popular options, which is the 912 IS and the 915 IS. Well, why did I not choose the 915? It's a great option, super powerful, but it does have some drawbacks. One of the big ones is weight. The engine itself is heavier, and it requires a number of components that are heavier. So it needs a constant speed prop, which adds weight, and you needed an entirely additional engine monitoring unit, an EMU, what's called the stock box, which was an added weight penalty. So not to mention, you'd have to sort of fiddle around with how you balance your CG out. You had to move a battery tray in the back. Not the greatest thing in the world, but not also the end of the world. So those weight penalties already were something that I wasn't super excited about with the 915. I think the performance that you get out of the 915 versus the weight is totally worth it, but it is still just something to keep in mind because your max gross goes down every time you add weight. So also, the heavier the plane, the less snappy it is. Like if you fly a really, really light plane, they sort of pick up off the ground much faster. They stop faster. That's a big thing. Like your momentum and your ability to stop quickly is very highly dependent on how much your total beast weighs full. So why else not to buy the 915? Well, at the time when I started purchasing engines, which it takes forever to get these things, the 915 required a hydraulic constant speed prop, which is very heavy and super expensive. It's like $12,000, $15,000, something ridiculous like that. And you needed your own dedicated, I talked about this, stock box EMU. It wouldn't directly interface with the G3X Touch. So you're talking $4,500 just for an EMU on top of all the avionics that you're buying, and then another, 10 grand plus just for a prop. And the price of a 915 starts to run away on you pretty quickly. So I ended up, trying to rein in my horses and ask myself, do I really need 165 horsepower? Is it worth the many thousands of dollars additionally that I'm gonna have to spend on it? And I decided no. And here's why. This plane flies just fine with 85 horsepower. Is it going to win, whatever race that people are doing nowadays? Probably not. But is it going to outperform most bush planes on the market that are not modified? Absolutely. I think you're gonna outperform a lot of your stock 180s, your stock 206s, your stock Mauls, your stock 170s, your stock, 180s. I already said that, 185s. So most of your planes that are flying out there, this with 85 horsepower alone will outperform them. Will I outperform other Kitfoxes? No. Will I outperform Draco? No. RIP Draco. But 100 horsepower is still beyond the 85 horsepower, which will already beat out a lot of planes on the market. So if you're at altitude, like if you're at 6,000 feet, you're running, I think, 70 horsepower. I've done the math on that, 70 to 75 horsepower. You still have really, really high performance on this thing. Pretty much all of the bush strips in Idaho, you can take like a 180 into. So if you can get a 180 in there, you can definitely get one of these things in there with 100 horsepower. So am I gonna land on the tiniest mountaintop in the middle of the highest ridge and mountain range on the hottest day? No. But am I gonna outperform most bush planes with 100 horsepower? Absolutely. It's still gonna be a freaking sweet plane. It's super lightweight. This thing burns only like 3 gallons an hour. It was expensive, but totally, like in terms of dollar per value that you get back, I think this is the best bang for your buck that you can get. The prop that I'm putting on here is a, man, I don't even know this offhand. It's like a 70-something inch Luga. I talked to Jason at Badass Power Sports, I think, and he talked me out of the constant speed prop because if you're looking for static thrust, which is basically your takeoff performance, the best thing you do is have a long two-blade prop. And that's what the seaplane guys do typically, is they have a long two-blade prop. So since it's on bush wheels and it's a tail wheel, I can deal with a long prop. And so I actually bought one of those from the Ukraine directly, which was weird. But I got it delivered, and that's what I'm going to mate with this engine. So I know it's not that exciting. It's not a 915, but this build is sort of trying to be as stock as possible. We're not going crazy about engines or really customizations in general. We're just sort of following the protocol and making a plane that's sort of close to whatever the factory is building these days. And this is what I ended up with. So yeah, I mean, the main drawback to this engine is it's only 100 horsepower and it's pretty expensive. You know, it still is not a cheap piece of equipment, and I spent a lot of money on this thing, but I'm glad that I made this choice. Happy to see it on here hanging, and I can't wait to fire it up. So yeah, that's why I chose this engine. And I'm sorry if it's not a gazillion horsepower, but I think it's still going to be sweet. Enough of why I picked this engine. Let's talk about what I've done to it so far. So they send a firewall forward kit. Kitfox sends you the whole thing. And that's another reason to buy this one is if you buy the 912IS engine, you can also buy a pre-wired panel and a complete firewall forward kit. And it eliminates a lot of labor that you have to put into, not just labor, but troubleshooting and just issues that you might run into down the line, because Kitfox has done a lot of that work for you. And they did a really good job. So the firewall forward kit includes basically everything you need to build the plane. Some things that I've done differently so far from the firewall forward kit are, I decided that I wanted to add a oil thermostat for the oil cooler. So with this engine, Kitfox does include an oil cooler because it's good to have an oil cooler on these. Pretty much everybody recommends putting them on there. This oil cooler, if you're operating in hot places all the time and you never fly it when it's cold, this oil cooler is great. You don't need to do anything to it. If you ever plan on flying anywhere cold, you have to put a thermostat on, or else you will overcool the engine. So I ended up getting one from an aircraft supply store that's like 10 miles from here, and have run my own oil thermostat. That's not a standard option with the firewall forward. You have to order one yourself. The parts aren't that hard to come by, but it's definitely a little bit more oil tubing, fire sleeving, and then this whole thermostat and fittings and valves and stuff like that. So everything's in the firewall forward kit instructions on how to put that stuff together. So if you want to, you can do it yourself. Kitfox will you can call them up and order the whole kit for the oil cooler. And it's, again, I've talked to lots of people. I don't know why they don't include it as a standard option. Unless you live in Florida, which I do, but you don't plan on flying it anywhere ever where it's cold, you got to put an oil cooler on. Or sorry, oil cooler thermostat. So yeah, put one of those on. I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so there's my thermostat. You kind of see it mounted in there. I'm still trying to find the final position. Kitfox has this like fancy aluminum angle, or sorry, stainless steel angle that they mount in here, and I have all the parts to do that, but I thought I could do it with an 8L clamp. Lockwood Aviation, who's down here that I've been working with on some of this stuff, they do all this stuff with zip ties. So it's not good to have it hard mounted with like direct steel attachments, but these are like somewhat vibrationally isolated with the 8L clamps. So I got to think about if that's going to be sufficient to isolate the thermostat enough. So while I'm over here, I tried to rig up the all the radiators or the rad system and then the oil cooler system to finally mount them here to these tabs. The problem with doing that is once I drill those holes, that's how high my radiator is going to sit, and you want to really fit that height to your cowlings. So basically, you can't finally fit all this stuff in here until the cowlings are fit. So I don't want to fit the cowlings because cowlings are over there. It took forever to show up because Kitfox is really, really backed up on fiberglass. Cowlings are hard, and we'll go look at them. These cowlings are really hard to work with. Honestly, their molds are not in the greatest shape. Not gonna lie. There's some spots in here that I'm just not super happy about the fit, and it's going to take a lot of work to make it look pretty. But you know, I'm ready to do that. Just not at this moment. I'm basically putting these on the side, and we'll deal with them when everything else is run and taken care of. So yeah, before I run all this stuff over here, I basically want to get my cowlings on and get the radiator height set so that we can get all of our lines and stuff measured out properly. I mounted the fuel pump. There's this little, basically power wire and control wire that runs to the other side. Pretty straightforward, comes out of the engine. When you get the engine, there's just like this massive rat's nest of electronics coming off. And slowly, if you work at it, you ended up, putting everything in their home. and getting everything sorted out. So here's all of your electrical connections. There's a starter and I think it's a master solenoid or whatever they call it. There's my Rotax battery with the Kitfox tray. There's fuel pump. There's I think that's a fuel screen. So fuel comes out of the firewall right in there, comes into the pump down into here, goes from the pump into this fuel manifold, which they don't show this in the manual. They don't drill these holes, right? So the holes for this manifold, which there's one on the bottom and one on the top, they aren't drilled in the firewall. So honestly, like, it was really hard to drill a hole through here with all this stuff mounted. So I wish I would have mounted this thing or drilled the holes prior to putting the rest of this crap on here, because I wouldn't have had to like sneak in there with a drill somehow and kind of do a mediocre job of drilling a hole. So that, I guess, should have had some foresight to see that coming, but you can't know everything. Definitely something that should be done though before the engine goes on. You got to get those holes in there somehow, and doing it with the engine on is a real pain. Here's a coolant overflow. Pretty straightforward. It's just like an L bracket with a pipe clamp. Your oil reservoir, so this is a dry sump system, so most of your oil sits in this thing, not in the engine. And you just sort of mount this thing on here with pipe clamps, run a oil overflow. I still don't really know where to terminate this, but I just got it kind of sitting down there for now. There's your coolant overflow line, which runs over the top to the little nipple on the inside side there. This one I do have a cabin heater option. So let's see, that's coming off the engine. That's the coolant line coming off the engine. And then there's this little splitter. That's going to go through the firewall to the cabin heater. And this is going to go to my radiator down that way. Okay, so there's a Grove brake reservoir. Something I've been doing with the brakes and fuel lines. I didn't like the aluminum hose that they included, so I ordered pre-made braided stainless hose from Jegs. In order to really make, I guess I could show you a better version of this. So here you go. These are all pre-made. These are not only stainless braided fuel hoses rated to like 1500 PSI, but they're also coated with this nylon weave so it keeps them from chafing, other things. Because that's one of the, it'll if it doesn't have the coating on there, it'll rub into your fabric, and it'll also rub holes in the stainless, and dirt and stuff can get in there and it can ruin the integrity of the hose. So this, I'm going to put the numbers up eventually of what all these runs are. You can get all these things from Jegs. Yeah, so I got these fuel lines all the way running up into the firewall there from Jegs. So all these fuel hoses are AN6 fittings, and Kitfox includes this sort of standard easy bend aluminum hose or tubing with the kit, and they expect you to run this, at least on the non-firewall side, so on the firewall back side, they expect you to run this stuff. And on the firewall side, they have just normal, like pressure hose, that rubber pressure hose for the firewall side. So I wanted the stainless hoses no matter what, or like if it was stainless tubing, this is aluminum tubing. I didn't want to use this aluminum tubing. I wanted to use stainless tubing because stainless is a much more robust system for fuel lines. In order to get the right stuff for stainless tubing, I'd have to order stainless tubing and all the parts to make stainless tubing. That's really expensive. So I did all the numbers I ran all the numbers and then thought about it in my head, and I said I could order pre-made lines and with the connectors and everything, and I wouldn't have to buy all the equipment, but I'd get to take advantage of the stainless runs. So it's a lot more expensive. I spent like $300 on fuel lines or something like that that had pre-made ends, but I just think it's a much better option than the crappy aluminum. And these aren't that bad. This is just standard rubber lines that people use. But I didn't like this aluminum. I wasn't going to use the aluminum. So it was stainless or bust. And because of the cost prohibitive nature of buying all the right bending tools and flaring tools for stainless, I just decided I was going to get the pre-made lines no matter what. So Jegs, which is an auto parts store for racing components, they sell all this stuff in all these pre-made lines in like 1 foot increments. So you can buy fittings and all sorts of stuff to adapt them as well. 1 foot is a little bit much for some of these runs. So what I'm going to do is go to the auto parts store in town, and they will actually make fittings for you. So I'll just have these cut down you know, I'm going to mark them all and then have them all cut down to the perfect length so I won't have extra bends and things like that. And that way, you know, I've avoided buying more tools that I'm never going to use again. Because that's really, at this point, I'm trying to do the best that I can to not accumulate more one-time use tools, because it's just, you know, it's expensive, and I keep spending, like, that's this plane, you know, there's the price of the kit. They don't talk about how much freaking money you're going to spend buying tools. So I'm trying to avoid buying as many tools as possible because I'm only going to use them once, and yeah, it's not cheap. So the Jegs line option has been pretty sweet, and I'm actually really happy with the quality of the stuff from Jegs and the just how easy it is to run these stainless lines. So. Okay, the manual doesn't really specify this very well, but I had a hard time figuring out which was the in port and which was the out port on the fuel injection rails. This is the out port, I believe. I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but this is the output, and the input's on the other side. I don't know if it really matters that much, but I'm going to run the, basically this is going to go out back to the firewall, to that little nipple, and then through back to the return line on the tank. So I bought all pre-made brake lines from Jegs. You can't really see them in there. I can try and zoom in, and there's a stainless, they're pre-made stainless lines. Jegs sells these in 2-inch increments. So these you can get bang on for the lengths just right off the bat. They're all AN3. Yeah, so those are AN3 stainless braided hoses. And you want something flexible here, so you don't want to run hardline. I did not like the crappy plastic stuff that they sent, which I'll show you. Okay, this is what Kitfox sends for brake line. It's just like cheapo Teflon tubing. I mean, my bicycle has nicer brake lines than this, so I just didn't really feel comfortable putting, I mean, again, people get away with these for a long time. I've had brake lines fail on me on a plane on the runway, which is not fun. So is this gonna work? Yeah. Is it cheap? Yeah. Is it light? Oh, it's totally super ultra lightweight. But is it gonna be as reliable as those really nice like racing stainless lines? Definitely not. So I decided to scrap this, spend a little extra money, and do it the right way with the stainless. Okay, so because I had to order all my own stainless lines, I had to figure out what everything's going to be in terms of length and all the fittings. So I had to spend almost probably 6 hours designing a system that would work, and then pulling the trigger online with all of the many different parts that I needed to run basically my own brake lines and fuel lines, pre-made from Jegs. I can publish what I did in terms of length. So far, they've worked out really well. I have the parking brake kit. I haven't run anything back from the parking brake to the actual brakes. I'm going to try and use what's called NICOP, which is a hard line that's very easy to bend. You don't need fancy bending tools to work with it. And Jegs sells pre-made double flared NICOP lines. You have to have a double flaring tool to use these. I think it's 3/16 NICOP line. So I didn't want to buy a special double flaring tool, which are not that expensive. I don't want it. So I bought the pre-made runs, and I'm going to do NICOP down the fuel, or down the legs for the brakes, hard line down the legs, and then hard line, if possible, hard line from the parking brake valve through the fuselage, through the fabric, and then I'll have a short stainless pigtail from the end of the NICOP line to bridge to the gear leg. And I'll show when that's done what that looks like, but I'm still waiting on a few NICOP lines here that I'm going to throw on, and hopefully that looks pretty sweet, and then will be much more robust than the plastic Teflon option. Okay, while I'm over here, we might as well talk about the elephant in the room, which is this panel hanging from the top. This is Kitfox's pre-made paneling harness, or wiring harness. It's pre-made panel, pre-wired panel, whatever it is. It's the G3X Touch, which is one of the reasons why I chose it is because it's everything in one screen. It works really happily with the 912IS, and it's hard to beat. If you go out and piece out every single piece, unless you're just going to go really cheapo GPS, if you want anything glass whatsoever, it's cheaper to get the fully integrated G3X option than to try and go piece it together with like a bunch of G5s and GPS units and all that stuff. So great option. I am blown away by this panel. It is unbelievable. It's the best thing I've ever bought from Kitfox. So thorough. I mean, every single end is wired for you. In fact, my whole conduit idea that I stole from Brian is totally frivolous at this point, because they have every single wire, end, and terminal basically labeled and run for you. So the amount of work that I'm gonna have to do for this is significantly reduced if I were to try to do this myself. And it's done very well, very professionally, super nice terminations. I mean, I can't tell you how awesome this pre-wired panel is. Totally worth the labor, or the money that you pay for it. There's no way that I could have done this well. I mean, it's just really beautifully done. Obviously done by a professional. It's Nick, who crashed his Kitfox last year or something like that. He has this whole setup in his house, and he builds them. He has a YouTube video about it. I'm just really impressed with this. And it's, again, the nicest thing I've ever bought from Kitfox. And if I had to buy anything again, it would be the one thing I would not even hesitate buying this a second time around. Hands down, worth every penny you spend on it. We'll see if it turns on the first time. I mean, there could be some flaws with it down the line, but just looking at how the work's been done, it's really impressive. So I spent probably 2 hours today with a friend of mine trying to run wires down the wingtip. One of the downsides to the kit is that, or the pre-wired panel, is that all the ends and terminations are already put on there for you pretty much, with the exception of like the tail light and a few things. So, for example, the magnetometer, which is out in the wing, has that magnetometer can termination, and that does not fit down the wing very well. So it would have been better to just sort of like leave those pins on there somehow. But I mean, I understand like how hard that is to do from Kitfox's perspective. So if you're going to do it yourself, it's definitely easier to fish stuff down the wing. So I spent probably 2 hours fishing stuff down wings, but super duper happy with the way this kit is put together. So I'm putting the engine on pause for right now and working on this electronics so that I can sort of get some stuff out of the way. I also feel like these fuel lines, once they're run, it'll be hard to get some of the electrical stuff in there. So I'll get all the electrical stuff pinned down and laid down, and then fuel lines will go on top of the electrical, because they're actually the thing that needs to be replaced more often. So yeah, holy crap. Man, there's so much I've learned in like the last 2 weeks just working on this thing. I can't even, like the amount of effort it would be for me to get into videos is just absurd. So, I mean, every day I come out here, I'm trying to learn something new about, wiring and, engines. Like I don't know that much about engines, but it's kind of sink or swim here. If you don't know anything, then you don't get it done. So, I've been really spending a lot more time now trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing rather than actually doing things. And I just have not had the inspiration to do videos in the last 2 weeks. It's not even really the inspiration, it's the time, because some of this stuff's a little bit overwhelming. I also feel like if I don't understand what I'm talking about, it's hard for me to do content about it, because I feel like I'm not really giving anything valuable. So a lot of this stuff I'm just, completely new to, and there's still a lot to learn. This is what I've gotten so far on the engine and stuff, and yeah, it's definitely, there's a long road ahead to sort of work out some of those kinks and get it running. So we're getting it done. Definitely progress is slowed, but we'll keep hammering on it, and yeah, get it done. Everything so far has been doable, and I'm like super stoked on this paint job. Super stoked about the engine, and yeah. What else? Do I have anything valuable to say? Yeah, I don't really have anything else valuable to say. So I'll check back in with everybody in a couple weeks probably. My uncle's coming back down, so we're gonna hammer out some of the like two-person stuff and more technical stuff. It's nice to have somebody there with you so you can wallow and also bounce ideas off of and just have a helping hand. So hopefully we'll have some good progress in a couple weeks. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. We will see you soon.